So, welcome back, dear listener, to this Psychosynthesis Sessions, the podcast, where me and my good friend Ryan O'Kane are talking through all things psychosynthesis, gently questioning even, and reimagining the richness of psychosynthesis. And we've been tracking the publication of my book. We've been working through The Act of Imagination. This is where Ryan always points to the book.
Yeah.
Off camera.
Yeah.
So we've been working through the chapters, and we've this is episode or part 6. So we're at the end now. So what are we particularly getting into this time, Ryan?
Well, we're in the last episode of this series, which has been focusing on your book and kind of taking each chapter at a time. And we've come to the last section of your book, which is the epilogue. And I suppose the epilogue is partly a summing up, but also a kind of, maybe not just a summing up of the content, but what the process of writing it was like, and also, pointing to the future. Where do we go next with the ideas and your analysis in there, in the book? What implications are there for psychosynthesis more generally? So maybe, in the spirit of the book, which is a focus on experience, what was the experience? Maybe we'll start there. What was the experience of writing the book for you?
Yeah, that's how the epilogue opens. Something like when you get to the end of a book, reading a book, you might think the writer just kind of knew what to write and how to write it, and then just got on with writing it down. But obviously, it's not at all like that. And I'll open the epilogue with a little description of the writing process, and how you start out with the vaguest of an outline of a intuition, of a hunch, of a sort of dream, even a gut feeling, and then you just keep chipping away and following the little glimmers and insights and indications that come up as you follow the writing process, and slowly through thousands and thousands of word choices, in the same way as a therapist conducts a therapy session, I say in the book, which is, again, you don't know where it's going to go. You've got an intuition. You're sitting with the client. There's a sort of mystery or an unknown, and you attend to the situation and you listen and you make word choices. It's a talking therapy, after all. And through all these word choices and the refinement of the language, finally things start to gather into a coherence, and it begins to take shape and clarity. And slowly the book comes together. I think there's a couple of things in particular that stand out in that process. The first one of which is that in no way, shape, or form did I plan to write this book. Obviously, at a certain point I did, but for quite a long time, I didn't think I was writing a book. To begin with, I was writing another book. I'd written Waking Dreams, and quite quickly I started to write another book, but it wasn't this book. And I had lots of material, and I had moved in a particular direction. But then something happened that inspired me. Something happened that maybe we'll come back later in this discussion. But something happened that sort of pointed me in this direction and got me interested in writing about psychosynthesis. And this is something that happened. I started writing it up as an essay. And I thought I was just going to publish it as an essay. And then it sort of grew. It's like Jack and the Beanstalk or something, or Fantasia and Mickey Mouse and all the the broomsticks and buckets. It just got bigger and bigger. And then it was a series of essays for a while, and that was cool. And I was like, okay, I'll just write a series, like half a dozen essays. And then it grew, and then it became, and then in my mind it became then it became a book, and it was a short book, and I pitched it. The original pitch to the publisher, Transpersonal Press, was to write a short book on psychosynthesis, approximately 100 pages long.
Oh wow!
And that pitch got accepted by the publisher, and I had a contract to write the book. And then when I went on to write the book, so I'm writing a book now. It turned into what it became, which is 280 pages long. Anyway, but the point
what's wrong with that?
Well, I did worry about it for a while, and I didn't say anything to them when it grew and grew and grew. And it grew a lot bigger than 280 pages. I definitely, the editing process brought it down. So it was fine. But the point is, it just sort of unfolded. It was a bit of a mystery that opened up for me, and I think that sort of matches the material in the book. Kind of it mirrors the content.
Is it a different experience then? Was that a different experience from writing the first book, from writing Waking Dreams?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It was definitely it's a different experience. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was. Well, I knew what I was doing. I'd written a book before now. I hadn't written a book when I wrote Waking Dreams. And Waking Dreams, I had a lot of the material because I'd been teaching it for so long and developing it through teaching. So it was more about writing it down. And there was a few developments in the writing process, but nothing like in this regard. And I got asked to write Waking Dreams, whereas this book sort of asked me to write it down. It's kind of like, well, an actual person didn't ask me to write this book, but it felt like, and this sounds a bit woo-woo, but it felt like I was being, something wanted this book to be written. Something, someone, somewhere, some mystery beyond me. It was a bit transpersonal. I did feel like I was being guided, and that it wasn't just about me and my little ideas. And that was, again, that's mirrored in the book, the sort of mystery and the sort of participation and the sense of, I'm not a center, I'm not the one in control.
Yeah.
And that's definitely what the book's about in some ways.
It's lovely to hear you describe that experience, because it's a kind of thing, it's something that I think we both hammer home a bit as a message to our students that, well, one, writing is an experience, and it's you, like, the thinking happens on the page. It doesn't happen in your head beforehand. It's an engagement, and it's really good to hear it from someone who's got something to show for that process, something really significant to show for that process, because it takes a lot of trust, doesn't it, that you're going to get there, that there is something that's going to emerge when you feel a bit lost or overwhelmed by ideas or not knowing where something's going, or you've got to trust your intuition.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because the other thing about the writing process was just how goddamn vulnerable I felt, particularly quite early on in the process. I had a lot of anxiety, not about whether or not the book would be written. So maybe slightly different to what you say. I mean, what you say is true. You need to have a faith that something's going to happen and keep going. And yeah, absolutely. What you and me bang on about in teaching writing is to not identify with those critical doomsayer voices that say, "Who do you think you are? That you think you can write a book or an essay? It's all shit, isn't it? You need to just go home and play video games instead." If you listen to those voices, yeah, you won't write. And it's totally normal, I think, to have those vulnerabilities, and that's there in chapter 2, and when I talk about the frustration stage of the creative process. But the vulnerability in this regard, it was that, but in particular, it was like I was worried about what might happen when the book was written and how it would be received. A big part of the writing process was a concern about that, because when I started writing the book, not when I finished, but when I started, it changed through the process. But when I started writing the book, I was a bit, there's a critical edge. I definitely felt like I was, I had some things in my sights that I wanted to say and to question and to bring into awareness. And and that's why I reached out to get endorsements and to get that's why I reached out to Molly Young Brown and asked her to write the foreword, because I thought, well, if I can get the blessing of the teachers that have come before me, the people who taught, who were taught by Assagioli, that original generation of post-Assagioli teachers, if I can get them to see what I'm doing is genuine and sincere, then maybe other people might read it. And that absolutely happened. Absolutely that happened. And Molly Young Brown was just the most supportive, sweetest email writer person. We never met. We never even spoke. We just had these emails between London and I think where is it? Mount Shasta, California. When she sent in the foreword, I was like, can I write down your address and the date that you finished the foreword on? Because I always like it in books where it's like, you read the foreword and then it says Ernest Hemingway, Paris, 1952 or whatever it is. So
you get an image.
You get an image of Molly Brown, Mount Shasta, California, 9th December 2025. So that happened in the end. People read the manuscript. But before the manuscript was finished, I'd gone on a journey, and I wasn't so worried by the end of the writing process, because while the content that I wanted to critique was definitely there, and it did indeed get critiqued, I was happy to find alongside that material other material that I could heartily agree with, and was actually what I was bringing to the table anyway. And I saw connections between. It was kind of like Assagioli was critiquing himself, and I'd started with the same. It's just that I drew it out in a way, because and that's how the book progressed. It was a dialogue between two Assagiolis.
That came across really clearly when I read it. That's what it felt like. It felt like you facilitated psychosynthesis for Assagioli.
Yeah. It's because I was getting interviewed about the book by Sue Fox recently, and she said, was there an inner figure that came to you during the writing of the book? She asked me that question, and I was like, well, I don't do inner figures, because I'm all about language, and I was being all pedantic, and because the experience isn't that they're inside you, but I know what you mean. And what I said to her was that the character that came to me in the writing of the book was Assagioli himself, and because it was 2+ years, and most mornings, like all through holidays and everything, I would be either reading, writing about, or thinking about Assagioli's psychosynthesis. And so it's not a big surprise that an image appeared of him.
Yeah. You inhabited his mental world, or his experiential world, didn't it? In that. That's quite a lot of effort. It's like, there's a real reverence expressed there to give someone so much attention. I suppose
Well, for a long time, I was toying around with the idea of having him on the cover. I was going to commission a portrait. And I enjoyed that for a while. And I was trying to think, what do I want him to be doing in the portrait? I wanted him to be a sort of dynamic. I didn't want him just to be sort of smiling. Because I'd seen a really good picture of Carl Jung and he was like smoking a pipe. And I thought, what could Assagioli be doing? But in the end, I thought it's not a book about Assagioli. It's a book about psychosynthesis.
You've reminded me. There is a really. Have you come across? I can't remember. Is it Hilma af Klint? Have you heard of Hilma af Klint? She's an artist in the 20s or 30s. She was.
Yes.
Yeah. So she did a portrait of Assagioli, but it was. I mean, it's highly stylized Art Deco-y kind of.
Interesting.
I mean, it influenced abstract painting, but she's this. It doesn't look like a self-portrait, but
right.
I mean, it's right. It's anyway. That's a sidebar, but look that up. It's a really beautiful painting.
There you go. You learn all sorts of things on this podcast, everybody. But talking to you, it's kind of like maybe that Assagioli appeared to me sitting down the end of the table, because he became quite a smiley, sort of laughing, joyful presence. He seemed quite delighted with what I'd done, and that's what gave me the reassurance. That's what calmed me down. But now I'm beginning to think that was the Assagioli. It's kind of like, because not the other Assagioli. Maybe there's another Assagioli that thankfully didn't turn up, who was the guy that I was critiquing. The more sort of psychoanalytical Assagioli, attached to the sort of lexicon of the unconscious Assagioli, the sort of empirical scientist Assagioli, sort of this sort of dualistic Assagioli. The guy that I was aware of, he wasn't worried about that being critiqued at all. So yeah, it was, and you know, it was a great process, lovely process, and reflecting back on it is nice. And what stands out, I guess, is that the process mirrored the content. It was like following a journey to somewhere I didn't quite know where I was going to go.
What does that make come up for me while you're saying that? It reminds me of. I mean, the biography of Assagioli is very sparse, and there was a deliberate, maybe a deliberate holding back, maybe of a lot of biographical. Not just biographical, but just like the intimate details of his life and who he was, and that's come out a bit in people's experience of him. But what struck me while reading your book is also the resonance it has with some real, conscious parts of what motivated him. There's, his first article when he was 19. 19. It's a very ambitious article.
That he wrote.
Yes, it was toward, what was it called? Towards an Aryan humanism, back when Aryan meant, Vedic culture, right? Basically, that's what he was talking about. So he was talking about a very conscious mission to bring Eastern thought and Western thought together. And there's also a personal mirroring of that in the fact that his dad was a doctor, or his adopted dad, let's say. And his mum was immersed in theosophy, and so was his wife, actually. So there was in his personal life and in his stated mission, bringing together those, two modes of thought, those two cultures of thought, was really part of like what he was trying to achieve. So yeah, I also see that in what you've brought out. I suppose that dialoguing between the different kind of sides of him.
In a kind of East and West. That's interesting. Yeah. A synthesis.
Yeah. Well, that's his life goal of trying to synthesize that, and the difficulties of doing so, and maybe that's another podcast topic, like how, to what extent was he successful in that mission, I suppose. So you talked about the experience of writing it, and you've offered it out to the world. What do you want? What do you want from people? What do you want people to get from reading your book?
What do I want people to get from reading the book? I think the top line is freedom, which sounds a bit twee, maybe, because that could go wrong if you just do what you want. But I think freedom to, I'd like the book to set people free. I'd like the book to set people free from not just people. I'd like the book to set psychosynthesis free and psychosynthesis psychotherapists free from set ways of thinking, from fitting themselves into a particular way of being or doing or practice. Yeah, I think if the book does anything, it questions some big assumptions in the presentation of psychosynthesis. Mainly in one way in particular, which is that I go, well, this is a metaphor. When you conceive of the psyche as higher, lower, middle, that's a metaphor. It's a spatial metaphor. There isn't actually a higher section to the psyche, and that's just a way of talking about an experience. So by sort of getting behind the metaphors of the unconscious, of the I as a center, which again is another spatial metaphor, or the other metaphor of the sort of analogy, if you like, to the empirical scientist that can stand back. I really sort of question, well, what is psychosynthesis? And I think that's how I structure the epilogue. I sort of boil down the questions to two key questions that I ask throughout the book. There's obviously lots of questions, but I think the sort of overarching ones are, firstly, what is psychosynthesis anyway? And that's how the book begins, which is a kind of no-brainer, obvious question that needed to be asked. And that's why I started to write the book, because I felt like I had an answer to that question that was different or fresh or more relevant or new or helpful that hadn't been written down before. But in the writing about it, I quickly come to the conclusion that, it can only really be answered in one of two ways. You can sort of say, well, what psychosynthesis is this particular set of techniques, this particular set of teachings, and this particular set of influences. That is what constitutes the correct, bona fide, authentic psychosynthesis. And you sort of arrive in a sort of position of dogmatic certainty. And very early in the book, I basically, I deal with that quite quickly, for two reasons. First of which is that you quite quickly run into how another person thinks of what psychosynthesis is. Because if you ask, I think we've said this a few times, if you ask two psychosynthesis psychotherapists what is psychosynthesis, you get at least two answers.
But that's, I suppose, just coming back to what you said about, your headline, freedom, right? What you want. But I think you've gone beyond, because there's kind of different ways of looking at that. I think, part of like what you raise at the beginning of the book, you talk about this distinction between seeing psychosynthesis as a kind of static set of concepts and framework, and it as process, things are becoming. And there is a freedom in our experience of psychosynthesis, I suppose, especially within the trust, maybe, of it being a kind of quite broad church, all right, a broad and pluralist church. And I think you've gone beyond that, because within that pluralist, there's kind of there's this thing called psychosynthesis, and you can project on it whatever you want, so there's I don't know, there's people who focus on the transpersonal, there's people who see it as humanistic, there's people who see it as kind of existential or stoic, or it's a parts based, or it's Jungian aligned,
or a system.
Yeah, all of those things. So it's but you've gone beyond the kind of pluralism, which is a form of freedom, I suppose, to trying to find what is common, or what cuts across all of that unites us in this field, I suppose.
And yeah, absolutely, that is what happens and I sort of, the main way I begin to get underneath that and do something that isn't just pluralistic is to point to what Sajuli says, which is that, there is doctrine, there is teachings on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's experience. And he writes about psychosynthesis as an experience. So he's shining a light on the fact, he says, the experiential fact, that psychosynthesis is a sort of living process that's happening on different levels, psychologically. It's an experience of synthesis, basically. So that's the two principles in the book: experience and synthesis. But even if you go down that road, it's still not completely satisfactory, because you can then say, well, this version of psychosynthesis that's inspired by, I don't know, parts model and internal family systems thinking is pointing towards the same experience as another emphasis within psychosynthesis, which could be like a sort of transpersonal or a spiritual or a emphasis. And you're like, okay, but it still begs the question, what is the experience and how do we know we're working with it? And what is it that they have in common? Because you need to sort of chunk it down a little bit. And that's where the second question, and the main question, I think, that gets explored throughout the book. And weirdly, I only make that explicit in this epilogue. I don't ask the question out loud, but it is implied all the way through the book. And the question is, what does psychosynthesis do? What does psychosynthesis do? Because that's the original inspiration that led me to write the book, because I had an experience or an epiphany or an insight. I was sitting in the room with colleagues, and we're sitting around people who teach psychosynthesis, people who've studied it for decades, longer than I have, and I've been at it for 23 years now. And as usual, I was very aware of how my colleagues spoke about psychosynthesis in diverse ways, because I'm a bit obsessed with that question. What is psychosynthesis? And I'm always listening to how people talk about it and the differences between them. And some of them don't even use the lexicon of psychosynthesis when they talk about psychosynthesis. But they seem to think they're teaching psychosynthesis. And that had always kind of frustrated me or confused me. But I think on that particular day, something that I had been gestating for a long time sort of crystallized, if you like. And the thought that went alongside that crystallization was, if psychosynthesis is anything, it's happening here in this room, and it's what these people are doing together. And that's what moved me away from what is psychosynthesis to what does psychosynthesis do? Because it seemed to me that it wasn't really so important how, I mean, it is important. It's not that all understandings or presentations of psychosynthesis are equal. Some of them are better than others, and we could get into why that might be. But that's not the main thing. The main thing is what they do with that understanding. And in summary, what they'll be doing with it, if it's something recognizably called psychosynthesis, they will be, in one way or another, bringing together different aspects of experience into a greater whole, into a synthesis. And if they're doing that, then I would argue that's what makes it psychosynthesis. And yet that wasn't stated or made explicit. And that's why we've been talking throughout these discussions about an implicit modus operandi, a sort of culture or a way of being. And that was the genesis of the book, really. And that moved psychosynthesis away from a what, like a thing, to a how, in a way. It's more of a verb. It's like we do psychosynthesis in the same way that we run and jump and skip and eat. These are all verbs. So too do we psychosynthesis.
What, do we not psychosynthesize?
Yeah, I had a debate about that with the editor, and she wanted me to say psychosynthesize, but I won that argument. I thought it was neater if we just say, because run is run, to psychosynthesize. If psychosynthesis itself is a verb, then you don't want to change the spelling to point that out.
Okay, all right.
It's like you don't say run eyes or eat eyes or.
No, I suppose the model for psychosynthesis is the thing that when people first learn about psychosynthesis, the word they often get it confused with is photosynthesis. And that does have. Yeah, but I get
again, that's the process as well.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe everything is, if you see it in that way.
But you're right. There is no static version of synthesis. It doesn't make sense to talk.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I argue in the book is that one of the main reasons for the elusiveness of psychosynthesis, which is to say why it's so difficult to say what it is that in many ways we're asking the wrong question, because it isn't a thing.
Yeah.
It's not a noun.
It's a process.
And yet a lot of the theory that is used to describe psychosynthesis does present it as a noun. So you got like the egg diagram, and all the different locations. So a place is a noun. There's a lot of talk about like subpersonalities. Persons are nouns. And then the egg diagram metaphor is about content, psychological content. So like psychological objects or things, like feelings and thoughts. And things are nouns.
I have a sidebar. Is it okay if I?
Absolutely, go for it.
I should have a little flag I wave for. It was interesting. So when I read, like I hear you talking about psychosynthesis that way, I've got a kind of an imagining in my head, all right, where I substitute the word psychosynthesis for self. And I wonder if there's something there as well, because it's like, I don't know, I'm hearing it kind of when we're talking about, I mean, maybe, the example you give is maybe taking it into interpersonal psychosynthesis with the people in the room and whatever. But when we're talking about it in a therapeutic sense, we're talking about someone engaged in the process of psychosynthesis. And I wonder if you replace that, because the reason I'm saying this is because there is a concept in Gestalt. They have a process approach to the self called, and they veer away from talking about self and they talk about selfing.
Nice.
and this might be a sidebar that we'd have to explore at another time, but I'm wondering what the overlaps are there between the kind of the Gestalt kind of imagining of this process, ongoing process of selfing, and what you're describing in terms of psychosynthesis as a process.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I'm not too surprised that I feel a sort of resonance with what you've just said about selfing, given that probably as a result of the conclusions that I just shared a minute ago about psychosynthesis being a process, parallel to that in the book is a critique of the self as a static center that is unchanging, permanent, and separate from the passing contents of experience, which moved me towards a presentation of psychosynthesis in chapter 4 that didn't rest upon finding self, didn't even mention self. It's about the story and finding yourself in a story and being identified with a story, not with a sense of self. So yeah, I think the language of self is tricksy. I mean, and also the other good thing about Gestalt is that they're very much about the sort of the interaction between self and world.
Yes. Can I read a little quote of that? Because there's something, because I think there is something slightly different. There is something different about what you're describing, or maybe there's an extension of Gestalt implied in what you're talking about. Because there's a phrase where ourselves emerge in the act of reaching out to our world at our respective contact boundaries in the present, in an ongoing, ever-changing dynamic process. We are the contact we make. We exist when we contact the world. That's that kind of...
Yeah, so it does situate the person in an experiential context.
Yeah.
And it's very explicit about the opportunities or the threats that that environment provides, and is all about the porosity of selfing, if you like, and whether or not we reach towards and avail ourselves of interacting with that environment or not. Even, like on a simple level, it would be, the Gestalt cycle of experience would be, you come into an awareness of a feeling, you recognize that feeling's hunger, and then you start to think about what you're going to do about that. Well, I could go to the fridge and get a piece of gatto. And then you might do that. You might go to the fridge and ingest the gatto, and then you have a sense of satisfaction, or feeling a bit sick, maybe, given it's gatto. But oftentimes, people can't imagine how to satisfy. Well, oftentimes we're not aware of what we feel. Number one, that's a strong sense of alienation. Or if we are, maybe we aren't able to imagine what to do about it. Or if we are able to imagine what to do about it, we don't have the will or the confidence or the strength to enact that. And then even if we do enact that, can we let that in? Can we let the cake in? Can we digest the cake? Do we have indigestion? Do we fight against the nutrition from the cake or the person or the novel or the whatever it is? Do we let the world in? So there's a real surrender there to allow the world in. That's a sort of threat. So it's quite an interesting model. What's your thoughts there? Say a bit more on the differences from what I'm saying. It's interesting.
Well, I suppose the thing that jumped out to me was something about this contact boundaries with our environment. It's very much about, in the moment, contacting the reality where we are now. But I suppose what might add to that model is your kind of widening of experience to include the imaginal.
Yes, which contains self and world. Yeah. And the way I think about psychosynthesis and practice psychosynthesis, I'm not really thinking about self and world as such. Certainly, I'm not thinking about them as dualistic or the only two components. I'm helping the client to notice and describe the story that they find themselves in, the perceptual situation that they find themselves in, which will obviously include a description of the world, other people, places, events, and also their feelings and thoughts about the world, and also how that impinges upon them. But I don't really separate it out into the worlds that and self. It's like the imagination synthesizes it all together.
Yes. There's no moment of contact in a way. You're immersed.
No. So that, yeah. So if we go back to the cake thing, it would be more like, this is a story about a person who finds themselves feeling a bit empty, feeling a bit like hungry, I guess, more simply. And they wonder what they're going to do about it. And they remember that there's a cake in the fridge. But they think, oh, am I allowed to have the cake? What, I might get into trouble if I have the cake. So they continue to stay hungry. So that's a sort of story version that is similar but different. Yeah. And then you get into the fantasies about, what could happen if you eat the cake and what are you worried about might go wrong.
I mean, we can explore this more some time, yeah. Cool. I mean, I had one pedantic point.
Great.
Verbs are still concepts.
Right.
They're still categories. There's still a kind of in and out when we use a concept, a category. There's still running and not running, loving and not loving, willing and not willing. They're kind of implied, like that the opposite is implied when you use a verb, like the norm. So I suppose I had a kind of what's the difference between psychosynthesising or psychosynthesis as a verb and not psychosynthesis or not psychosynthesising? What are we leaving?
The first, that's interesting. The first thing that comes to mind is it's a question of time. Because you might think that a mountain isn't running or moving, but if you wait for long enough, it is. And similarly, psychologically, you might think that a person is not changing, is not psychosynthesizing, is not following a process towards synthesis. But if you wait long enough, something will happen. And also, it's while Assagioli has the premise that psychosynthesis is natural and innate, and psychological life tends towards ever more satisfying levels of synthesis, that's not to say that that process doesn't get interrupted or thwarted or blocked.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what psychosynthesis psychotherapy is all about. It's like when the process becomes impeded for whatever reason, that's what psychological suffering is, in a way. Is because we, as we say in psychosynthesis, become identified with a limited sense of self, a limited range of experience, a limited understanding of others in the world that we hold on to, perhaps unnecessarily for different reasons, in a way that doesn't serve us anymore. Maybe it used to serve us. Maybe it was useful to think that you're a primary school student. But once you go to the secondary school, if you hold on to being identified as a primary school student, you're going to get all stressed out because you're being asked to do things. Life's always coming at you.
Yeah.
And asking, demanding, offering you new possibilities, demanding that you change or offering new possibilities. You take your choice. Some people see it as a demand and they get scared and they want to stay with what they know. And psychosynthesis psychotherapy, it seems to me, is about understanding that and slowly allowing people to begin to move again.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a stab at it. I mean, it's not, we don't need to be dualistic about it, because I mean, there's loads of different verbs. So it's like psychosynthesis, not so. I suppose you mean psychosynthesis. You're either psychosynthesizing or you're not. So yeah, I guess I am saying you are, or it's trying to happen.
Yeah. I think this. I mean, look, there's there's a whole philosophical can of worms we could go down. That's why I said I was being a bit pedantic, because I think what it does lead to is a kind of leading into those kind of infinite Buddhist paradoxes of differentiation versus synthesis, of thingness and no thingness, and all that. And that's, the only process you can capture in a word is the whole.
Right.
Everything else is a snapshot of interconnected process. So we are inevitably drawing a false boundary around something when we call it anything, because it's all interconnected. But we have to do that in certain circumstances to get through life or to communicate.
Well, I think that's where we're going to in later on in the episode. We'll maybe come back to this, because I think psychosynthesis isn't a philosophy. And while we can draw upon philosophies as influences, what we're doing when we do psychosynthesis isn't a philosophy. I mean, you could say it's a psychotherapy, but I'll say more about this later on. But we are using language, but not to philosophical ends. We're not trying to help the client clarify the philosophical verities of their experience.
Yeah. It's important to remember that context, isn't it? I think that we're trying to find something that helps us as therapists, or us as clients, or us as people, not lock ourselves into ways of unhelpful ways of thinking in that process. And just remembering that actually there's a pragmatism behind this book as well, about,
Well, I think, yeah, well, let's get into that. That sounds good. So I think one of the things I'd like people to get from the book, to go from the philosophical to what I think psychosynthesis is, if it's not a philosophy. The obvious one that I've been banging on about, bleating on about, harping on about, is that, hopefully when people read the book, they will have an experience. Hopefully when they read the book, the language will be evocative enough, descriptive enough, rich enough, not just to give them a new understanding, a new set of ideas or frameworks, but to actually tell a bit of a story that takes them somewhere, and they feel moved, and they open up and they recognize themselves in the same way that when you read a good novel and the author, in just a few lines captures an experience that that you've had, but you've never really thought about it, never mind articulated it to yourself or articulated it to other people. But when the author nails that experience, which hitherto had just been a sort of vagueness for you, and they shine a light on it with rich, descriptive, poetic language, and you go, yes, that's true. I recognize that in me. And that allows you to, not own it, but, step into it and have that and recognize that in yourself all the more. And I think that's what I really hope people take away from the book. And I think that's what psychotherapy is about. I think that's what psychosynthesis psychotherapy is about. It's very much about, it's a talking therapy, and we're trying to use language, not to explain away the mystery of life with philosophical ideas, or even religious ideas, or even psychological ideas. I think what we're trying to do is help people to live in the mystery. I think that's one of the brilliant gifts at the heart of Assagioli's psychosynthesis, is that it points people towards a way to live in the mystery of life. So famously, he says, psychosynthesis does not aim nor attempt to give a metaphysical or theological explanation of the great mystery. It leads to the door, but stops there. Psychosynthesis does not aim nor attempt to give a metaphysical or theological explanation of the great mystery. It leads to the door, but stops there. So it's, and I just ran with that in the book, and it was like, to me, that means don't rush into explaining, interpreting, figuring out what life is. It means leaning into experiencing what life is. And life is mysterious. And that begs the question, if psychosynthesis isn't a philosophy, if it isn't a religion, if it isn't a metaphysics, if it isn't even a science, then what is it? And I think for me, where I've got to is that psychosynthesis is an art, or an art form. And so in that sense, how we're using language doesn't get into the weeds of abstruse Taoist philosophies and distinctions, or Buddhist distinctions, because we're using language to paint pictures. We're using language to tell stories, and you know, we're not helping people to paint a painting, a literal painting. We're not necessarily, although we could be, helping people to write novels or write poems. But it is an art form in the sense of we're taking people on a creative, an experiential creative journey. And what we're creating isn't a painting or a poem necessarily. We're creating what you might call psyche, or psychological life, or self, perhaps. Yeah. That is the opus. James Hillman calls it the opus. It's like the opus of the painter is the canvas. The opus of the poet is the poem. The opus of the author is the novel. So the opus of the psychotherapist is psyche itself. We are creating psyche. And therefore we could understand it as an art form and a creative process in and of itself. That is what it is. And there's a couple of places in the book, I'll just read them out, where I intimated that. By now, it will be apparent that therapeutic technique in this book is not meant as a mechanistic or procedural application from a manual. Rooted in the original meaning of the Greek word techne, meaning the craft or skill of making and creating, psychosynthesis techniques are a creative and even artistic endeavor. And then later on, to recreate the transformative effects of not just sunsets, but any aesthetic or artistic experience, the techniques and therapeutic principles conveyed throughout this book have endeavored to showcase an approach that emphasizes working with images as imaginative experiences, rather than turning images into theoretical ideas. So it's like when you let go of, it's not about reasons, explanations, when it's not about theory or philosophy, it's about experience. It seems to me that experience is imaginative experience is what experience is. We're always in a story, whether that's a story about the past, a memory, that's imagination. Whether that's a story about the future, a concern about what's happening next week, that's imagination. And whether you're caught up in an argument with, your therapist, or how you see your partner, or your sense of belonging in the world, or your fears about the world, your response to the news and technology, that's a story as well. It's like imaginative experience is the raw material, if you like, of therapy, past, present, and future. And to work with that, we need it. We need it to be an art form to match that raw material.
So there are some people I'm sure, that headline at the beginning about freedom. There are some people that receive what you've just described as incredibly liberating. That is artistic freedom to shape yourself, to shape your experience of life and your psyche. Some people will receive it as incredibly scary and destabilizing, as like, what? I haven't got a philosophy to hold on to. I haven't got a stable set of, a yes or no, or I'm just kind of going into this uncertain and very subjective world.
Well, that would be to go a bit too far, because as we talk about in the techniques chapter, which we discussed in part 3 of the podcast, you need technique. To be a good painter, you need to have good technique, right? To be a good novelist, you need to have good technique. You need to, at least, know what a sentence is and have a vocabulary.
Yeah.
You will have read lots of other books and studied literature, and you will have a sense of what makes for a good paragraph in a chapter and how to open them and close them. So it's not like it's just going with the flow that makes it a free artistic practice. There is a skill base that we can learn, and yet technique alone isn't what is going to make your painting a good painting. Isn't what's going to make your piano piece sound really lovely. There is that creative aspect that comes in, that spirit of psychosynthesis, as Sajoli calls it, which is, I think, the freedom to be creative and to imbue your technique with the moment, with the relationship, with the spirit of psychosynthesis, I guess. And in that way, it's not just a mechanistic procedure, because you can't. That's why AI art is a bit.
I knew you were going to go to it. In my head,
or like AI movies are a bit shit, or AI music's a bit shit.
Yeah. They're all about technique.
Well, it's like a machine that's just kind of churned something out. So it's like, I mean, some people don't seem to mind, and some people think it's going to get so good that you won't be able to tell the difference. I don't think so, but even if it's just like, even if you just do like painting by numbers or stitching by numbers, I mean, obviously that's not going to be as good a painting as something that's original and has been created out of the synthesis that an artist makes between themselves and their medium. It's like, or between the therapist and the client, there's a unique moment that's constellating all these different elements. And out of that, you say the right thing at the right time with the right tone. And that's your art form. That's your medium, the language and the relationship.
Well, it's the context.
And that shapes the person.
Yeah. It's a contextual thing. It's like, that's where the focus of, that thing about there's a focus on output, even in the art world. There's like, we look at a painting or a piece of work and say, okay, that's a thing, and I can teach our AI to do that thing. Right? I can simulate that thing. Well, that thing has no meaning without the context.
Yes.
It's the very context, I can look at an identical piece of work, one done by AI, one done by a person, in a historical context, in an emotional context, which is one thing that I remember you use this metaphor in Waking Dreams of like, there's some people who look at paintings and they need to read the thing. They need to read the blurb in order to appreciate the painting. I'm still quite attached to that, because what that helps me do is get a sense of the context of go, okay, wow, there's a human being creating this in this context, and I can really connect with this as part of a process of a human being trying to express themselves in this context. Whereas the identical painting by an AI, I just go, well, that's meaningless. That means nothing to me. Oh, fine, it looks exactly the same, but it means something completely different.
Yeah. Okay, the blurb gives you the story, if you like, the wider story of the painting. Yeah. Yeah. So, but the thing is, I didn't quite nail that. This is what I was thinking until after it's handed in the manuscript to get edited. That psychosynthesis was an art form. It only just gets mentioned in passing, but I did slip in an epigraph that made it into the final book, a little quote from a novel by Hermann Hesse. And the weirdest thing is that after I handed in the manuscript, I went on holiday in the summer. And, you go on holiday and you take like, well, what I do is I take like a number of books that I think I want to read. And then I get there and I think, actually, I don't want to read these books. I want to read these other books. So luckily I've got a Kindle now, so I could download. And what I wanted to read was The Glass Bead Game by Hermann Hesse. That seemed to be the book that I wanted to read. And I just went through it like a knife through butter. I read it so quickly, and it was just such a joyous reading experience because it seemed to me, mysteriously, magically, transpersonally, that the novel itself was articulating very similar themes to the ones that I'd just written about in the active imagination. Only because it was a novel, it had much more freedom to expand upon what I'd been writing about, because I was sort of tied down to writing about it as a psychotherapy. I was able to write case studies and transcripts, but I was tied to a sort of, a set of ideas for all the critique I have of ideas. Is still a framework of thought. But in the novel, he seemed to be writing about what I'd been saying, and I'd really like to just read out a couple of passages just to give you a flavor of that. So, the first passage I'd like to read out, it echoes how I start the book, because I start the active imagination with "This is not the truth," and that leads us into, theories are just abstract ideas about an experience. So check this out. So this is from Hermann Hesse's The Glass Bead Game. It's a character saying something to another character, and the character says, "There is truth, but the doctrine you desire, absolute perfect dogma that alone provides wisdom, does not exist. Nor should you long for a perfect doctrine, my friend. Rather, you should long for the perfection of yourself. The deity is within you, not in ideas and books. Truth is lived, not taught." And that's pretty much verbatim what I quote Sagioli saying. He says, "The psychosynthesis is discovered. Psychosynthesis is not proven by ideas and teachings and explanations. It is discovered by experience." So that was a bit trippy. I was like, and then I kept going, and they talk about, the Glass Bead Game, the title of the book is, then you never actually find out what or how to play the Glass Bead Game. You learn about it around the edges, and basically the Glass Bead Game is set in the future, and briefly, without going into too many details, it's a high art form in which people synthesize together history, science, maths, philosophy, music. They have a way of symbolizing all these things and bringing them together into harmonious relationships.
Yeah.
And there's a whole sort of cult, or a sort of like school of thought and training around these aesthetes, basically. And so this second quote, which is the one that made it into the book as an epigraph, because it really sets the mood of the book. I think it really set the tone that I was trying to strike. So it reads, "Our game is neither philosophy nor religion. It is a discipline of its own, in character most akin to art. It is an art sui generis. Our game is neither philosophy nor religion. It is a discipline of its own, in character most akin to art. It is an art sui generis.
So that's what crystallized for you, that idea of psychosynthesis as an art form, reading that.
Yeah. I mean, I've had intuitions, and I'd had people in the past say, "Oh, you're not really a psychotherapist, Allan. You're an artist," which I quite liked. But I thought, well, I know I am a psychotherapist and I'm an artist, maybe. But I didn't have the space to flesh that out in the writing. It was more like, it's nice to be able to talk about it a bit more now in the podcast and flesh things out a little bit. But I was definitely reaching for it there, because like in the book, I mean, to quote the book, what I say in The Act of Imagination is, what is needed is a form of communication, a doctrinally neutral therapeutic language, which avoids imposing a belief system on the client. While the nuances of psychological life will never be fully communicable in words, some language styles and ways of speaking will nevertheless be able to close or narrow the theory experience gap better than others. The simplest route to doing so is achieved by avoiding or at least minimizing theoretical terminology. I think that's from chapter 2, but in chapter 3, I talk about how Assagioli basically says the same thing. And that was a massive deal for me, that, I think we spoke about this in the techniques chapter, that he was advocating not using jargon when you do psychosynthesis, because it's a sort of barrier. It's a sort of wonk speech, a privileged lexicon that the client might not speak to the client's experience. So yeah, the art of psychosynthesis.
Do you want to see? Do you want to see a painting of Assagioli on that point about art?
Well, the people on the podcast might not see very much if we do that.
I think we can. I thought we'd experiment.
Well, they can hear it.
No, we can we can put it on the screen.
I know, but people are listening on the podcast.
That's true. We can share it, maybe. Maybe we can put it in.
I always remind you of this when you point to the book.
I know, you're right. Maybe we can put it.
Okay, I'll describe it to the people. I'll describe it to the people that are listening. So what's this you're sharing? What you describe it, Ryan? What
so this is a spiritual portrait of Assagioli, and it wasn't Hilma af Klint. It was someone who's one of her kind of peers, Olga Frobe Kaptein, who was painting around the same time and was also kind of influenced by theosophy and stuff. So
it's a portrait-shaped painting with a sort of pedestal with a stand and a long pedestal with a sort of goblet or cup-like structure, and a love heart background and a sort of sun background, and then a star at the top.
Yeah,
it's very geometric. If this is a portrait of Assagioli, it's certainly not a humanoid.
No.
Shape. There's no personification there, really.
Yeah. It's very esoteric. Lots of golds and blues.
Golds and blues and reds.
Yeah. I quite like it. It's really nice.
And if people want to find this, Ryan will put it in the show notes.
I will.
Good stuff. But we should sort of begin to wind down the episode.
So talking about endings, then endings of the book, endings of this series of podcasts, and what might be coming next.
Yeah, so I think the way that I ended the book is probably how we might want to end this season, if you like, of the podcast. And I had a lot of fun writing the last paragraph. Because basically what I won't read it out, but I'll paraphrase. So basically what I say is that, I've been at pains to point out that you can't pin down psychosynthesis to any one presentation, and I've not claimed that in the book. I've presented what I call a principial approach to psychosynthesis. But that doesn't mean that they're all equal. And we mentioned that earlier. It doesn't mean that all presentations of psychosynthesis are equal. Some might be better than others. And I think what we want to do is to work to improve the understanding that we do have. And a better understanding would be one that more accurately describes the process of psychosynthesis. To my mind, a less useful understanding would be one that's more abstract, more conceptual, more jargony, less able to describe the sort of nuance of experience. So we want to elaborate and develop our thinking, because how we think about psychosynthesis isn't just a matter of, personal choice. It's like how we think about psychosynthesis will determine how we notice the experience of psychosynthesis, and then that will determine how we work with people psychotherapeutically. Now, therefore, given that my presentation is just one way of doing it, what I say at the end of the book is that my hope would be that this book sufficiently captures the inspiration of some readers that some of them might want to take it forwards as the basis for future works. And therefore, you can see this book as just another step on an ever unfolding journey. And the last two lines are, "It is not the truth, it is not the end." So I start and finish the book with, "It is not the truth." But I end, the last word is end. It is not the end. Because I think if psychosynthesis is anything, it's a sort of process, it's a living process. Experientially, it is a living process. And I guess what comes out of the book is that also the theory of psychosynthesis, perhaps similarly, is a process and can grow and develop. And Assagioli even invites us to do that, as I've been saying. So it was a nice way to end a bit because, as I mentioned earlier, I was aware that in writing the book, I needed to get the blessing of the people that had taught me, if you like, the post-Assagioli teachers who had influenced me. And then I finished the book with a sense of, the people who are reading this book or the people that I'm teaching now, maybe in 20 years' time, or maybe it won't take them 20 years, maybe in 10 years' time, they'll be the people writing the next book on psychosynthesis. And that's just such a lovely place to get to. I sort of find myself in between.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is probably about right for someone who's 53 going on 54.
I think you've got another few books in you, Allan. Don't worry.
But you know what I mean? It's like I'm middle-aged, I guess. But I think if it's changed me in any way, it's like I mean, obviously my work and what I do and my personal life is still important. But I think where I've got to, and again, this mirrors the content of the book. It's like I feel much more aware of and more responsibility, if you like, for the culture of psychosynthesis as a whole than I was before. And looking after that culture, because it seems to me it's quite a fragile. Culture is a fragile thing anyway, full stop. It can just disappear like that. It's quite easily destroyed, but not easily created. And if psychosynthesis is a sort of living culture, we maintain that, not just through writing books or teaching seminars, but through our relationships, and strengthening those relationships and meeting together in different formats and creating a community, if you like, that has the strength or the sort of ability to, be a niche for people to grow in, I suppose, and for psychosynthesis to grow in.
I think what I've really appreciated, Allan, is not just the content, not just the kind of they're really kind of philosophically rich and practical. Kind of reframing of psychosynthesis, but also how you've modeled, I suppose, a way of writing, a way of being in this that, I think there's something about that process of psychosynthesing or selfing or whatever we want to call it, that not for everyone, maybe, but writing can certainly be a path or a part of that. And that's been really interesting to kind of hear the process alongside the content, the process alongside the content. Because we all carry around with us, inevitably, all these influences, all these ideas, all these kind of half understood or half explored intuition, half expressed intuitions that we carry around us. We do our best day to day to bring some coherence to them, but to actually work through and consciously try and integrate, consciously try and synthesize all of that is not just a useful intellectual process and not just a useful contribution to thought, which it is, but as a process of becoming more integrated as a person. I mean, maybe I am talking from my own experience of a yearning, I suppose, for that kind of integration and that kind of space. And I've got my own writing plans, I suppose, in that direction. But I really appreciate hearing, that personal process that's kind of trickled along underneath all of this as well.
Yeah, that's nice, Ryan. You put that really well. Thank you. I think you're right. It's like you write a book, you might learn things, but it's not really about that. It's more like the material sort of gets woven into you. It's like you grow into the book becomes you in a way. And I think maybe that's what I'm taking away from talking with you today. It's like there's so many overlaps between the process of writing the book and the effect it's had on me and the content of the book. It sort of weaves its way into the fabric of your being. So it is a sort of self-transformation process, writing a book, which is magical and mysterious.
Yes.
And maybe similarly with doing a podcast also.
And I very much enjoyed the co-creation that we've been part of together.
We've done well. This is episode or part 6.
Yes, and
so we've achieved our plan, our initial plan.
Yeah. So we're going to bring that to a close for now. This part of the process. We will return.
The psychosynthesis sessions will be back with season 2.
Yes. We won't say when. In the spirit of most podcasts, actually, I've noticed they never tell you when they're coming back.
Well, I think how we did it this time was we recorded a bunch in advance, sufficient to start to release them fortnightly, so that people would have a regular feed for a while. And I imagine we'll do the same again. So do look out for probably there'll be a teaser trailer at some point announcing the theme of season 2. We've got some ideas, but it will be, as I think we've ended, and the note we've ended on in this episode, it will be, or how we started every episode, it will be a theme by way of reimagining psychosynthesis, gently questioning psychosynthesis, offering new ideas and methods for psychosynthesis psychotherapists, grounded in stories from the consulting room and everyday life. That is the plan. The creative space. So all that leaves us to say is that for those of you that have got to the end of this episode, and particularly those of you that have listened to us all the way through, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, well done.
Really appreciate your interest. Do subscribe, follow if you've not done so already. Do perhaps leave us a comment. We had a couple of interesting comments on the influences episode recently, because we do answer the comments and interact with them. Leave us a comment. Do share. Tell somebody else about it. Spread the word, and maybe leave us a rating, if possibly a 5-star rating, which might help us with the algorithm. Although we're pretty low bar on the algorithm. We're a bit niche, but you get the idea.
We're a slow burn, Allan. That's all.
Good stuff. So thank you, everybody, and go well.
Yeah, thanks. And we'll see you next time.